Welcome on again to Sid Caudle from Christian People's Alliance. Sid, it's day off today, isn't it? It's your bank holiday.
Yes, it's disgusting that you're making me work on my bank holiday, but
Well,
I'll forgive you. I'll forgive you.
we have that many bank holidays in Spain, of course, that it's just another one. If you miss the odd one on the horizon, usually in the same month as another one. The Catholic Church over here, as a matter of interest, although it's not highly regarded, especially among the young people. But you'd be surprised how many people highly regard it now, because most of the holidays are tied up with saints, Mary, you name it. So in that sense, they support it. That's another problem. We're not going to cover that today. I'll tell you what we are. It's unusual topics we've got to cover. But we're having ladies, put your crash helmets on. We're having a good go at the ladies in British politics. We'll start with Rachel from accounts, of course, because she's involved in a lot of stuff at the moment. Well, Rachel, about 12 months ago, came up with this wonderful idea, and it's right up your street, this said, mini Quango, let's call it. She wanted value for money out of the civil service and other government departments. So she set up a department which was called Value for Money. Sounds all
Office
right,
for
doesn't it?
value of money. Yes.
Yes. And Mr. Goldstone was recruited as this Quango, and it's typical of Quangos, even on a small scale, like this was. Mr. Goldstone received 1.6 million for his staff and himself, 15 staff for the whole year, and she's decided she's going to cut it. She wants it out of the way, which is a bit bizarre because he reckons that they've saved 15 billions of pounds. No, that's all right. Cost £1.6 million for wages, save 15 billion pounds. That's cracking. I'd vote for more Quangos on that basis, looking at the rest of them. But when you drill down, Sid, aforementioned Goldstone earns £950 a week, but it actually only comes in once a week. That's not a bad wage, but it's typical of the Quango situation. Have a go at that one.
Well, I honestly don't believe that this Office for the Value of Money that's been set up has saved 15 billion. Because if they've saved 15 billion, why is it the debt has gone up, or the deficit, I should say? The deficit is the rate at which debt increases. The deficit's gone up from 54 billion, as it was in the last financial year under the Conservatives, to 148 billion, which is the latest figures under Labour. And that mirrors the increased spending on Quangos across the board, with 28 new Quangos being set up and total spending on Quangos having gone up from 265 billion in the last general election to 353 billion now. So if they've saved 15 billion, where has it been saved? I mean, it's like there's all this additional spending. Maybe they've saved 15 billion, but actually spent 100 billion more. So the net increase is 85 billion. I mean, that's probably more like what's actually happened.
Can we believe anything that comes out of this government, or any government indeed?
Well, forget about any government. I mean, this government's been absolutely terrible. But what really annoys me is the extent to which they talk about what they might do, but then don't do it. I mean, a classic example is this one in, one out for immigrants. We've got a new agreement with France. It's going to be one in, one out agreement. So one person comes in, one person goes out. We send them back to France, and France take them back. Okay, well, they announced that a couple of months ago. So what's happening? Nothing. Nothing. It's not started yet. Well, let's announce it when it's actually happening, will you? Rather than announcing something that we hope we might do.
It's a classic example of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, all little peripherals that they might be sound bites, but they're not significant. I'm looking at the immigration figures and immigration generally. That can be solved. Other countries have solved it. But no, we don't want to. That is the truth, Sid. Before we get back to that, let's go over the pond and get a bit of light relief. It's surprising how much the US and UK are the same. We always say if it starts in the US, it'll come over sooner or later to the UK, and it usually does. Supreme Court have got their teeth, thanks to Trump, of course, into the NIA, which basically is the American version of the NHS. And you know, it's about DEI again, diversity, equality, inclusivity. They are spending billions and billions. And Trump says, that can't go on. The jobs being created and it's not going to the front line. And it's the same in the NHS. What is it about this particular type of public service that attracts the woke?
Yes, I mean, I don't know, but the reality is that it's across government and it's across governments worldwide that they're trying to promote all this, what I call New Age philosophy, because it's a New Age religion, and anyone who wants to study New Age, you know, understands, you know, what Alice Bailey was talking about in 1924 with her 10 principles, one of which was make homosexuality an alternative lifestyle. And when she said that in 1924, homosexuality was illegal, and it was illegal right up until 1967. So she was a visionary. You know, I'm going to make homosexuality an alternative lifestyle. It's going to become normal. And, you know, and she was also talking about removing the parental control over children and making divorce easy and all these sort of things, which she was talking about in 1924 when we had a very strict moral codes. And at that time, you know, it wasn't even foreseeable. Now it's a complete reality. So it's an agenda, and it's a new age agenda. And for people who don't know, Alice Bailey's printing press was a Luciferian printing press. She didn't beat around the bush. She worshipped Satan, you know, and everything she was putting forward was absolutely satanic. And it's not just me saying that, she said it, you know. So let's be honest about what we're facing. We're facing evil, absolute evil. And this whole agenda from Stonewall, you know, promoting diversity, equality, and inclusion, and promoting transgenderism and promoting homosexuality and all that thing to children in schools. You know, that's what they're doing. That was Alice Bailey's agenda as well, by the way. She said, don't worry about older people, get them young, preferably under 10. That was her agenda, you know, and her agenda is now being carried out in schools, and it's evil.
Sid, I absolutely agree 1000% with what you've just said. But how do you get this over to the public? Because most people will say, oh, it's a bit weird, this, what you're talking about. We're into the spiritual realms, if you wish. How do you get that over to the average voter?
Well, I think for the average voter, it's a matter of the Labour Party policies are harmful to our children. I think most people understand that this whole sex education in schools is harmful, you know, and ordinary people on the doorstep. And we've campaigned on it. You speak to ordinary people on the doorstep. And one teacher said to me, I have to teach this stuff. And she said, I hate teaching it. And another parent said to me, you know, my children of 7 and 9, they came home from school and they were telling me things I didn't know till I was in my 20s. And that was sex education in schools. Parents are up in arms about it. Teachers don't like it. You know, which is very interesting because when I was a youth, you know, teachers were all left wing. But now we've got teachers in rebellion against this whole new age liberal agenda. So, you know, it's happening. We don't have to actually, I don't, frankly, go outside into the big wide world and say this is satanic. You know, I do sometimes say this is from Alice Bailey, who didn't beat around the bush. She worshipped Satan. I do say that sometimes, but mostly I just talk about the issue and talk about, you know, sex education in schools and talk about what's being drag queen story hours and how harmful they are to our children. And, we've got to stop them. And the Labour Party is promoting them. And, and I think people are getting the message, frankly, really getting the message. Reform has certainly got the message, and they've said they're going to stop it. Trump has got the message. He's already put a lot of stuff in place, and banning cross-sex hormones, banning puberty blockers, banning promotion of DEI in schools. He's got the message, and he's doing it. And other nations are picking it up worldwide. It's by no means a one-way traffic. It's only the new age that is the gaining momentum. But it is a massive battle, and the BBC are totally committed to new age. Totally.
They are indeed. It's the massive brainwashing science that it's in practically every program. And if you realize it, you can look for it and you can identify it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's many ways that this comes and is revealed in their programming. They've got to be completely DEI. You've got to have somebody in a wheelchair. You've got to have an Asian. You've got to have a Western Indian and an African. And it's so bizarre, Sid, but if the ears and eyes are open to the truth, you can identify. It's a good game. We play that game. We don't want to hear country file, how a lady can do everything and a man can't do anything. That is shown in many ways when they visit the farms. But that's a topic for another narrative, let's call it. Let's go on to page 9. We often say page 9 of a newspaper. They want anything hiding, they put there. In this case, it's not really hidden, but it's not where it should be. It's about Norway. Perhaps that's the real reason. Norway have made the most phenomenal discovery of gas and oil near their coasts, not too far away. And it's certainly very viable. And I mean, they're already, in some respects, the richest country in the world. But this is going to really nail it for them. Now, why I'm mentioning that is that right next door, we own the seabed. It's ours in the United Kingdom. And there are signs that we could populate this place with oil rigs and get as much bonanza as they're going to do. The geography and the seabed makeup is exactly the same as within the Norway site. But what's happening? Well, I'll tell you what's happening. Ed Miliband and the big boys in the oil industry solve so many of our problems and not to be true. And the big boys are actually saying and coming out with the truth. I'll quote you what one of them said this week. It's not that Miliband is green. It's just he's a fool. That's a bit hard, isn't it? But I'm afraid there's a lot of truth in that statement. I mean, he's completely gone off the edge here. Everybody now is turning on him.
Well, yes, I don't think the answer is that he's a fool. I think the answer is that he's totally committed to what I call the climate hoax. And he's pursuing it with 100% commitment. We've got to get rid of all fossil fuels as part of the climate hoax. And if people don't understand, I mean, the carbon which fossil fuels produce is actually good for the environment. And, when you have more carbon, you actually get more green. And this is what's actually been even shown by NASA by having their photographs they've taken of the whole planet over the number of years. There's been more carbon produced, it's become more green. We're actually producing phenomenally more food now across the world than we were just 20 years ago. So, so the idea that somehow that we've got to get rid of all fossil fuels is just complete and utter nonsense. But he's committed to this hoax. I call it a hoax because it's so blatantly false. And he's not just, saying, well, I want to reduce dependence on fossil fuels, which is one argument. He's pursuing the Biden policy of cancel them all. I mean, Biden's policy, cancel all fracking on federal land, get rid of all fossil fuels. And the result was that he inherited energy independence from Trump. and he resorted to going to Saudi Arabia and saying, please produce more oil because we haven't got enough in the United States, which is just laughable. When he's getting rid of all the oil production in the United States and then going to Saudi Arabia and saying, please help us out. It's just ridiculous. But Ed Miliband is going down the same road. And he promised before the election that I will reduce fuel bills for everybody because we'll have more renewable energy, and renewable energy is cheaper, so we'll be able to reduce fuel bills. It's not worked. I mean, fuel bills are actually going up. And by cancelling all fossil fuels, he's doing an enormous amount of harm. And Trump came over here, in his visit to Scotland, which is where he's from, where his mother's from, by the way. So he's got Scottish roots. And he basically said in his visit to Scotland, look, you've got oil here off the Scottish coast. That's your wealth. That's the wealth of the United Kingdom. Make maximum use of it. And if Trump was Prime Minister of the United States, sorry, if Trump was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom rather than President of the United States, Trump would be absolutely doing what you're saying, making maximum use of the North Sea. And that is absolutely the correct policy. And if we were in power, we would produce it. And let's hope that Nigel Farage would, if he gets into power, he would do it.
Yes, indeed. Back to the girls, back to Rachel from accounts by a roundabout way. We were warned what Labour would be like. They spend and borrow. That's their credo. And sure enough, we've got that in one form or another. Now, thinking back on this, every single Labour socialist government has been exactly the same. Tony Blair's outfit was different. I nearly said better, Freudian slip. Perhaps I don't mean that. It was different because he covered it up beautifully. Good PR man, Tony Blair. But in essence, the same is happening. It occurs, we're talking about black holes here, Sid. £30 billion, some people say 50 billion, will have to be sorted in this autumn's budget. Now, that is frightening. Where she could go with that one, anybody knows. But when they came into power, they looked after their own. That was the trade unions. They got creamed. And the same, of course, for their friends in the unions and outside the unions, within the National Health Service even. They were looking after their own, not anything else. And it's come back to bite them big time, Sid, and we're going to have to pay for the bill.
Yes, but you see, they don't need to increase taxes. What they need to do is to cut spending, as I've said repeatedly. And they need to cut spending on quangos. They don't need to cut spending on the health service and education and defence and so on and so forth, which is what the civil service will tell them. The civil service will say, oh, well, if you're going to cut spending, then you're going to have to reduce spending on the health service and reduce spending on schools. No, you need to cut quangos. And if people don't know what I'm talking about, I mean, the total cost of all the quangos, which is basically what other countries call non-governmental organisation, we call them quasi-autonomous non-governmental organisation, they're the same thing. The total spending on all quangos in 2010 was 90 billion, which if you allow for inflation in real terms today, that would be equivalent of about 165 billion. And the actual spending now is 353 billion, which has gone up from 265 billion at the time of the last election. So at the time of the last election, there was a 100 billion increase in real terms. This government, by setting up 28 new quangos, has put it up to 188 billion increase in real terms. And it's just ridiculous. And you see, this, you talk about wages that were paid out to train drivers and hospital doctors, etc., in order to stop them striking. I mean, that cost about 10 billion. And when you put that 10 billion into perspective of the 188 billion in real terms increase, you realize that we need to stop worrying about that. It's the same with this winter fuel allowance. The winter fuel allowance actually saved 1.8 billion. And when you look at the increased spending on quangos, the 1.8 billion is nothing. I mean, by comparison, so we've got to focus on the real problem. And while I'm talking about the economy, let me just say quickly, the way to handle the economy is to, number one, reduce revenue spending. And you reduce revenue spending basically by cutting red tape, which is what quangos are. So just get rid of some of these quangos, and other ones that you just reduce the budget. You just say, I'm sorry, but we can't afford to give you to 20 billion. We can only afford to give you 10 billion. So for quangos that we need, like the Financial Conduct Authority, for instance, which was divided, what used to be the Financial Services Authority, but was divided into two. So we've got the other ones, the Prudential Regulatory Authority, and it's like, okay, these authorities are costing 20 billion. We need them, but we don't need all these staff. They've got too many staff, so we're reducing your budget. That's what we do to some of the quangos. To other quangos, we literally say, well, we've got 27 health quangos. We don't need 27 health quangos. The Adam Smith Institute said we can reduce them down to 9. So we literally say, right, okay, you've got these 27 health quangos. I mean, we're going to reduce them down to 9 quangos. So we're going to actually get rid of 18 of these quangos, and we're going to amalgamate them together, and we're going to reduce the budgets. So overall, we're going to save 30 billion from these health quangos. And by the way, all these 27 health quangos that we've got, not a single one of them treats a single patient. So none of them are treating patients. They're all just supervising, and sometimes the quangos are arguing among themselves. So the Care Quality Commission is telling NHS England they're not doing their job properly. And it's just like, it's farcical, frankly. I mean, they're spending enormous amounts of state money criticizing each other. I mean, it's just frankly ludicrous. But this is what's going on at the moment. So the first thing we've got to do is to cut spending. The second thing we have to do is to maintain or increase capital spending. You see, once we've saved this 188 billion I'm talking about, we can afford to spend 100 billion on what I've said we need is a new London airport in the Thames Estuary. Saved it by cutting all this red tape. And that's what produces the wealth. If we had a new airport being built in the Thames Estuary, you'd have to have enormous amount of new railway lines built up to it. You'd have to have new roads built up to it. And the consequences of all that, you'd have firms locating close to the airport. You'd have enormous amount of commerce. You'd have manufacturing built close to the airport, and so on and so forth. You see, so it just creates wealth in the economy. And then the other thing you have to do is to cut taxes. So as you save all this money, 188 billion, 100 billion is being spent on capital spending, and then you've still got 88 billion left to cut taxes. But also, you see, there's other things we can save as well. We've also said that we would remove the social requirements from government contracts, and that can save another 50 billion, because these Adam Smith Institute have also said that they could save 10% of all government contracts, and all government contracts come to about 453 billion. So if you save 10%, you save 45 billion, and 45 billion again is an enormous amount of money. I mean, so there again, this was only introduced, by the way, these social requirements in 2012. They were introduced by the Liberal Democrats when they were in coalition. And basically, we're not saying that you get rid of health and safety legislation. Of course not. You need health and safety. And we're not saying you get rid of employment legislation. Of course not. I mean, you need employment legislation. But these are additional social requirements, which have got to be added on to every government contract in addition to the normal social requirements. It's just ridiculous. We don't need them. Get rid of them. Save 45 billion, and use that money to cut taxes. It costs roughly 5 billion to take 1p off income tax. So you can see with 50 billion, you can actually take 10p off income tax. I mean, that's what we're talking about. And if you start making these decisions, but incidentally, this is exactly what Trump is doing in America. He's doing exactly what I'm saying, cutting revenue spending, maintaining an increase in capital spending, and reducing taxes. And the result of that is growth. That's what causes growth in the economy. See, what this Labour Party is doing is exactly the opposite. They're increasing revenue spending, cutting capital spending, and increasing taxes. That is the policy for reducing growth. And it's going to go down, it's going to be static, we're going to have increased debt, and what they're doing is a disaster. And by the way, the only reason why, at the moment, what they've done is masked it's because debt or the deficit has increased from 54 billion to 148 billion. Now, in a normal situation, that would be increased growth because you've increased borrowing by so much. You've increased borrowing to take on new jobs. As I've said, they take a lot of new jobs in Quangos, etc. That should bring growth in the economy. But because of all the other things they've done, of increasing taxes and reducing capital spending, it hasn't produced growth. It's produced the opposite. But they can't carry on increasing borrowing by that sort of amount. I mean, so they've now got to take drastic action.
Let's dig a bit deeper and
Okay, go on.
staying with Rachel. This weekend's papers were full of IMF because they are looking back to the 70s and say we've got the same pot boiling with the same poison in it as the 1970s. History repeating itself. And the IMF are going to be called in to sort it out, Rachel, if you don't obey the rules. Now, what does that mean? Big companies are kicking off as never before, Sid. And they're kicking off one way, as you just mentioned, about red tape. Secondly, about the amount of taxes that they have to pay, especially anybody on the high street. How do they expect the high street to thrive with what they're doing? And she has massively boosted, as we've said, public spending and borrowing. Now, let's take a barometer check on this, because what is significant is the cost of government gilts. Indeed, the interest they pay over a 20-year period, because that's like the prophet looking into the future and saying, well, we've got to get people investing in the UK government, so they print bonds. Some people say print money. No, it's bonds. So what do we have to offer for 20-year bonds? It's gone up to nearly 6%. 5.58%. That's how bad the economy is in Britain on a 20-year gilt. Now, that doesn't lie, Sid. That's not manufactured speech by the government or the civil service or even pundits everywhere. That is a fact. We are in the proverbial doo-doo.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if people don't understand what we're talking about, you see, is basically when government needs to borrow money, they have to go to the money markets, and to get money off the money markets, they have to pay a rate of interest. And obviously, the less money they need to borrow, then the lower the rate of interest they can get. Because if they only need to borrow a small amount of money from the money markets, then they don't need to pay a high rate of interest to get that money. But if they need to borrow a very large amount of money, which we're now talking about 148 billion increase in deficit, I mean, if they've got to borrow all that extra money, then they're going to have to pay a very high rate of interest to borrow it. That's the reality of what's going on. Now, we talk about the IMF. You see, what happened with the IMF in 1976 was that they came in and they forced the Labour government that was producing a policy of tax and spend. So they were increasing taxes and spending lots more money, and then getting into a position where they could no longer afford to pay pensions, and they could no longer afford to pay government employees. That was the situation they were in. So they needed to borrow money from the International Monetary Fund just in order to run the government. And the International Monetary Fund came in and lent them money, but the condition of lending money was that they had to reduce spending. They forced them to reduce spending. And when they forced them to reduce spending, the economy started to improve. So actually, by 1978, because I remember, I mean, I was actually standing in elections, believe it or not, in 1978. And by that time, the economy has started to improve quite significantly. And by the time of the 1979 election, the economy was in a much better place than it had been in 1976 because the government had been forced to follow the economic policies of the International Monetary Fund. Now, the International Monetary Fund is not in the same place now as it was in 1976. I mean, that's completely gone woke. So what the International Monetary Fund would do now, I don't know whether they would do the same as happened in 1976. They might well not do. Because they might actually say, oh, no, no, we understand, what we would now recommend would be some different policies. I don't know. But the reality is that the correct policies are to cut spending and to cut spending not on frontline services, but on red tape, which is, if you like, backroom services. That's the correct policy. And let's hope we don't have to be forced to follow that policy by IMF again.
Well, to put the last nail in Rachel's coffin, of course, if you compare the dreaded Liz Truss, who got ousted by, people say, bankers. That's a bit one-sided, but she was got out of the way very quickly. But let me tell you, with those figures of 5.58%, that's worse than what happened to Liz Truss, and she went pretty quickly. We are in a mess.
Liz Truss's mistake was to produce a budget that was uncosted. You see, what this government have done is at least they've kept the Office for Budget Responsibility on side, and they've listened to them and they've heard what they've said. She didn't have them on side at all. She just completely ignored them and produced a budget that involved severe tax cuts without saying where the money was coming from. That's what spooked the markets and caused the markets to turn around and very suddenly increase interest rates, etc., because they're saying, okay, well, cutting taxes like that without saying where the money's coming from is going to be a lot of extra borrowing, so we're going to need suddenly a lot of extra interest and so on and so forth. This government's done it a lot more slowly, a lot more gradually in reckless spending, and then where she did it was one major announcement which made a sudden effect on the markets. I don't think the money markets got rid of Liz Truss. I think it was the fact that she herself made a very cataclysmic error in not explaining where the money was coming from. And at the time, by the way, when she announced that budget, I said this is reckless. The only way she can save face now is to announce cuts to quangos, in order to pay for these tax cuts. If she makes that announcement, that will settle the market and she can stay in power. If she doesn't, she's in big trouble. I said that at the time.
Well, we're going to talk about Alex Riley. Who's Alex Riley? Well, he owns the biggest bar chain. I think he owns more than 300 bars throughout the United Kingdom. Posh bars, cocktails, and etc. And he's been around some time, and so he's been recruited. Was last year by the HSC, the Hospitality Sector Council, which the government set up because they wanted input about hospitality. Take no notice. The hospitality industry is in a mess, and the more laws they bring in, the bigger mess it's in. Anyway, he was recruited, and this is very sinister when we analyse what really happened here. He's been invited to leave. It's the usual thing. Football manager, you're invited to leave. And what did he do? Well, he actually disagreed with the government's policies and said, look, you've invited me onto this committee, mini quango, call it what you like, and I'm going to give my opinion of what you should actually be doing. And he was taken on one side and the whisper in his ear, do you realise you're now on the inside? Don't spoil it. That is horrible. Think about that. This is a clever way of gagging people. And they take no notice. They follow their own policies. And he said, well, you don't need to get rid of me. I'm off ski. I'm going. If this is the government said it's corruption.
Yes, well, I mean, there's no question there is, in my mind, an enormous amount of corruption in government. But you know, we've talked about this before. One of the biggest problems with somebody wanting to come in and change policy in government is the way the civil service operates. The civil service operates almost like a cartel, which you know, they have their own agenda and their own commitment, and certainly their agenda is to frustrate people like Trump or Nigel Farage if he produced similar policies when he came into power, or what problems that we would face if we came into power. But it is surmountable. It's not insurmountable, it's surmountable. But the problem is that the media tends to operate in conjunction as well with the civil service to make out that everything you're doing is absolutely terrible. But you see, the thing is, because Trump is so clever and is such a proven businessman, effective businessman, you know, he's been able to come in and basically say, these are my policies, this is what I want you to do, this is what we're going to do. Because he's also got control of Congress, thank goodness, he's been able to put those policies through. And the civil service in America, although they've wanted to stop him and tried to stop him, plus the media, you know, he's just slated the media, frankly, you know, and just called it the fake news media. And they've got alternative media in Fox News and Newsmax that are broadly speaking supportive of him. And he's been able just to effectively put his policies in place. And after he's put his policies in place, people can actually see they work. I mean, the problem that he had the first time round was that his policies were working, but COVID struck in 2019 before the election in 2020. So at the time of the election, the economy was still severely affected by COVID. And the consequence of that was at that particular time, a lot of people were being laid off. I mean, so now we know that COVID actually came from a laboratory in the in China, where America was paying for gain of function research, which has been proven. And so it looks as though the whole thing was deliberately created and deliberately leaked. I mean, it was highly likely, in my view, that the whole COVID situation was created to try and get rid of Trump. And they did, because if it had carried on the way it was in 2018 before COVID struck, if you looked at the state of the economy, I mean, the American economy was roaring, absolutely roaring. And Trump would probably have got back in with no problem at all. Because of COVID, obviously, the actual figures for the economy looked pretty awful at the time of the election. And of course, Biden came in and said, oh, look how I've improved everything. Look how these new jobs I've created. Look at, you know, and so on and so forth. Look at the way I've reduced the deficit and so on and so forth. Because he was comparing the situation under COVID with what was a year later when COVID was got rid of. Which, of course, every economy in the world picked up enormously after COVID was disappeared off the face of the earth, thank goodness. You know, but yeah, now he's in a different situation where he hasn't got a pandemic. I mean, although there's rumours that they're trying to create another one, you know, he's gone back to those same previous policies, drill baby drill, you know, cutting spending, cutting taxes, maintaining and increasing capital spending. And, you know, we're already seeing significantly more growth in the United States than we are in any other G7 country. And it's almost certainly going to continue and going to roar.
Let's tackle a difficult subject, which we have mentioned on another occasion, Sid, and that is the problems in Nigeria. Now, if you compare that to other parts of the world, it gets lots of press coverage. It gets hardly anything. Now, I ask myself the question, why? Why is this the Cinderella of the news industry? Horrible things are happening there. We've had a young Nigerian lass staying with us for a number of weeks, and she'd just flown in from Nigeria. And she told us exactly what was happening, especially from the Islam part of North Nigeria. Now, these are absolute soldiers, absolute jihadists. It's called Boko Haram over there in Nigeria, and they're extremists, and they're being allowed to carry out terrible things there. Murders of whole villages, emptying of whole villages. And the government in Nigeria does nothing about it. And neither do the newspapers, generally speaking, throughout the world. Why, Sid?
Okay, well, the first thing you've got to do is to understand what the background to what's going on. You see, when the British gave Nigeria independence, they gave the Hausa tribe in Nigeria, which is from northern Nigeria, the Muslim part of Nigeria, all the government positions and the right to rule. So they gave them the power, and they've retained the power ever since. And the reason they've been able to retain the power is that even though they've had elections, they've actually controlled the elections to make sure that they retain power. Now, people have got to understand that Muslims have got no commitment to democracy, and they've got no commitment to honesty and truth. And it's part of Islam. It's taqiyya. It's a good thing to lie to disbelievers to gain an advantage. And they're openly opposed democracy in some situations. You know, we don't believe in democracy. They'll say that. So because they don't believe in democracy, they don't believe in honouring the result of an election. They believe in controlling the election. Now, we saw this very clearly in the last election when we had Peter Obi, who was from the Labour Party, which was only a small party in Nigeria, but he was a Christian, and he stood in the election, and to all intents and purposes, it appears that he won the election. Even the BBC, God bless the BBC, actually did some analysis from a particular area, and they showed that Peter Obi had actually won in that state that they were examining, but it was actually the state result was given to Tinubu. Now, what actually happens on the day of the election is that they count the votes in the state. They then give the result to a particular individual who then takes the result to Lagos, and the result is announced in Lagos. So if the individual who is taking the result is corrupt, then whatever the actual votes are in that state, it can be completely different from what is announced in Lagos. And that's what was going on and what was happening. And the BBC proved, the BBC, I mean, the BBC is hardly, pro-Christian, but they proved that there was complete corruption. So we have a situation where this Hausa tribe for northern Nigeria is controlling the government, controlling the elections through corrupt means, and that they're basically supporters of Boko Haram. And they're supporters of the Fulani tribes. So they've got no desire whatsoever to clamp down on them and to control them. I mean, they may pay some lip service to, oh, we've sent the troops in and and have done a raid. I mean, it's like the French, managed to send some police who got some knives and deflated a dinghy. It's just tokenism. They're not actually trying to stop them. They're just playing a game, and to pretending that they're doing something. So what we need is the government effectively to go in there and stop them doing what they're doing. That's what should be going on and what should be happening. But it's not, because the government has got no desire to do it. And then you say the international media. Well, the international media is not pro-Christian and anti-Muslim. And that's the reality is that they're pro-Muslim and anti-Christian. So they've got no desire whatsoever to expose the wanton killing of Christians, and they're not going to do it, unfortunately. But let's hope that some of the alternative media, like Fox News and GB News, should be doing it, because they should be, because it's something that absolutely should be highlighted around the world. The corruption and what's going on, and the killing and what's going on, far worse, in my view, than what's going on in Gaza. I mean, but the international media is absolutely obsessed with Gaza, but completely ignores northern Nigeria, and it's wrong, absolutely wrong.
A lot of people agreeing with you, Sid, on that one. We move because we are out of time again. We have to get the footy section in. It's about refereeing. Well, this part's about refereeing, and they've rightly, in my opinion, decided that simulation is not a good thing. Well, no, it's not. It's cheating under any other word. This happens, of course, in many guises, whereby players throw themselves on the ground, allegedly having an elbow, as a matter of fact, in their faces, and they're clearly trying to get penalties or whatever. Even worse than that, in my humble opinion, is the holding of players in the box. You've got a big, strong, muscly team, then it's so easy, especially, are you listening, Manchester United, when you've got a very weak goalkeeper that weighs 4 stone 10. I'm exaggerating, but he's not a hope. He flaps around trying to get a corner ball pushed over the bar, and he's pushed out of the way. Well, it came back to haunt Fulham on the weekend, of course, because they got a penalty after VAR came into play. But holding of players in the box, yes, it's cheating. And referees now, hooray. And they've done a full analysis of this, in fact, and they've actually named names. They've named teams that are specialists in muscling their way in. Surprise, surprise. Chelsea, Manchester City, Newcastle. They're the ones at the top of the league. Well, last year anyway. Interesting fact, Sid, but at least they've decided to clamp down on it. Are we being too wimpy and saying, oh, we're wrapped in cotton wool, we don't want these players hurting themselves? Or do the goalkeepers need this protection?
Well, there's two different things that are going on. One is jockeying for position, and the other is holding a player to prevent him from getting to the ball. Now, you see, when it comes to a corner, it's inevitable that you'll have some jockeying for position because, different people want to stand in different places. I think goalkeepers should be protected, by the way. I think the referee should basically say that you're not allowed to stand within a few yards of the goalkeeper, because the idea that somehow a player can be right on top of the goalkeeper so he can't see what's going on and can't get to the ball, I mean, it's just ridiculous. But that apart, I mean, I think it's inevitable there will be jockeying for position. And when there's jockeying for position, people will be pushing and shoving. Then when the ball comes over, that's different. That's completely different. I mean, if a player is being held so that they can't get to the ball, then that's a penalty, no question. Or if it's out in the outfield, it's got to be a foul. And if it's a situation where a player is actually going into goal, then it can be a sending off offence if you're holding a player who's going for the ball, and if they weren't held back, they'd be through on goal. So those are the situations which we absolutely, referees have to clamp down very hard. No player should ever be prevented from getting to the ball and playing properly and or heading the ball or whatever. And I think it's maybe a thin line between jockeying for position and holding when the ball is coming, but certainly the authorities got to get to grips with people being prevented from getting to the ball when they should be, or literally when they're on the ball being pushed and shoved and pulled. I mean, to me, that's, if somebody's on the ball, is actually playing the ball, somebody shouldn't be allowed to push them and shove them or pull them to get them off. That's completely wrong, completely wrong.
Is it the old adage that a good big un will always outnumber and outmuscle a good little un, and you just got to accept that?
Well, strength is obviously important. I mean, you have to be strong on the ball, but I mean, I think smaller people should be able to play effective football, and it should be football, not it's not rugby, where you're when you're grabbing the player and whatever. I mean, small players should be allowed to play proper football.
And there's been some heroes that are very tiny in the past. I honestly said, don't see as many though today.
Well, even Messi, of course. I mean, Messi's only a relatively small individual, brilliant player. Players like that have to be protected. You can't have a situation where Messi can't get on the ball because he's shoved off it all the time. And I think you're right. I think the situation is getting worse.
There you go. It's miserable politics and miserable football today. Well done, Sid. We'll see you next week.